Old St. Peter's is being built under imperial sponsorship, under Constantine. He recognized the need for a church in Rome and really wants to put Rome at the center. Christianity, of course, wants to be tied to the Roman Empire, to the Roman emperor. So they're going to naturally try and do this in Rome. And it's built on the site of what had been the Circus of Nero, this hippodrome where you see horse races or hippopotamus races. Probably not hippopotamus races, but still. The idea is that it's being built on this large open site in Rome, or what is available at the time. They need room for liturgy. They need room for growing numbers. This would be the major church of the city of Rome. And it's the greatest of Constantine's commissions. And as we look at it, we have a number of things that we need to touch on. For example, vocabulary. So if I bring up my pen here, we have, as we move through the nave, this is where the congregation will sit. We have the transept, which is a crossing arm. So we have two of them, one on either side. And the apse that will become effectively the choir later on as we move through Christianity. And then we have the side aisles, which are part of the nave. They're the areas between the columns and the wall. So there would be space between these columns and that exterior wall. Now what's different is we have the narthex, that entry from secular to sacred, but we also have a large atrium. And this is not something we typically see in a lot of churches today. The reason they can do it there is it's Rome. The weather's good. We can use that outdoor space. We don't have to cover all of the space and go through all of that effort. We also have a fountain. The fountain being a symbol of cleansing. Today we would see holy water within a church, but the use of a fountain makes a lot of sense. The gatehouse is simply a way to control entry into the space. This whole thing is basically acting as moving through stages of going from the profane, the outside world, to the sacred, this inner space. Now, St. Peter's obviously doesn't look like this today. That's why this is the old St. Peter's. It's replaced around the time of Michelangelo. Peter is said to be buried here. There had been a small shrine on the site since at least the 2nd century, which tells us why it's built there. And it was built, this form was built to house about 3,000 to 4,000 people. It would be a very large structure. If we look at the elevation, so cutting it right down the nave, looking right down the inside, it would resemble a Roman civic basilica. The Romans used these as government buildings, very similar architecture, and it makes sense. Let's use architecture that we're familiar with. Originally, it would have housed relics, and we would have had pilgrims showing up, people who are coming just to visit the relics or the sacred sites. The exterior would have been fairly plain. Brick, some painting on the facade on the west side, but otherwise it would have been fairly simple, or what should be the west side. It's actually reversed from what we would expect, since the apse, the altar, all faces west instead of east. It's very unusual for a church to be laid out this way. Usually it's turned the other way. The interior would have been quite lavish. Here's a recreation of what it might have looked like. We would have had murals on the walls. One side would have been Old Testament scenes and one side would have been New Testament scenes. In the apse, so as we're moving up to the altar, we would have seen imagery that reflects the authority of Rome over the rest of the church. The idea that the Bishop of Rome is also the Pope, this person who is particularly powerful within the Christian hierarchy. Above the altar, you would have seen a baldacchino with 4 spiral columns, marking the spot of St. Peter's tomb. Now, to give us a better idea of what this would have looked like, I want to look at Santa Sabina, which is built around the same time with very, very similar architecture. So this is not the old St. Peter's, but we get a sense of all of those parts and how they come together. So here we have a choir or apse behind the altar. And this whole area that is marked out, this is going to be termed the sanctuary in Christian churches. As we look at the sides, you will see that we have those aisles, the area between the columns that are holding up the clerestory, which are the windows up above that bring light in, and the exterior wall of the church. So while it is part of the nave, it has a specific term, which is, of course, the aisle. And what we're seeing is very similar form. So the ceiling probably would have been flat. We would have seen depictions in the apse of various saints, maybe an image of the life of Jesus. We would have seen mosaics as well as frescoes or paintings. The mosaics would have been there because this is Roman tradition. We've seen Roman mosaics elsewhere, and they would have continued that into the churches. So we get a sense of what this old St. Peter's looks like. Of course, when they build the new St. Peter's, the current form, they will tear the whole thing down. So that's why we're looking at Santa Sabina.